Section 11.8 is all about samples and surveys. And there's a lot of vocabulary that goes along with samples and surveys, which really we'll just kind of go over the vocab in this video, and then we'll kind of have our discussions about what all that really means tomorrow in class. So samples and surveys. First of all, this section is really all about how are we getting information about people and about groups of people, which really is a lot of what statistics is, getting information and collecting data about people. So our first vocab word is population. And a population is all the members of a set. So we could be talking about the population of students at senior high school. We could be talking about high school students in Iowa. That would be another population. Another population is high school students across the United States. All of those are different examples of populations. And most of the time how we get information about a population is by looking at a sample. And a sample is part of the population. So if I'm trying to get information about high school students at senior, maybe I'll collect a sample of 100 students from senior. The 100 students would be our sample. Students from senior high school is the population. Okay, we're going to focus on this sample part for a second here. Okay, there are 4 main types of sampling methods. The way that we choose people in our sample. So if I was asking 100 students from senior a question, depends on, or my answers could potentially depend on the 100 people that I ask. Am I just asking my students? Am I asking the first 100 students to enter the building? There are a bunch of different ways to do that. So that's where these sampling methods come in. Our first sampling method is called a convenience sample. And a convenience sample uses members of the population. Who are convenient. So again, if I'm trying to get information about high school students from senior, if I'm getting the information, it would be really convenient for me to ask my 100 students, where that might not necessarily be the best representation. Our next type is a self-selected sample. A self-selected sample means that members volunteer. Members of the population volunteer. So if we had in the announcements like, hey, there's a survey on seniors website, feel free to go and complete the survey, that would be a self-selected sample because people are choosing whether they are going to do the survey or not. Then we have a systematic sample. Okay. In a systematic sample, we need to order the population somehow. And select from that population at regular intervals. So an example of that would be if we were asking every 10th person who enters the building. Okay. And while I have my orange pen here, I'll just go in and fill out a couple other things. So convenience sample, I gave the example of if I were to ask my students, that would be a convenient sample because they're convenient for me. Self-selected sample is if there's a survey online and it's optional to complete it. And then our last option for a sampling method is a random sample. And in a random sample, all members of the population are equally likely to be chosen. So that could be, let's say there's a computer program that randomly picks 100 names. Okay, so all four of these sampling methods have some good things and bad things about them as far as like how convenient they are and also with the type of information that we get from the sample. So one last little group of vocabulary. Once we get this information or once we figure out how we're going to sample our people, there's a couple different ways to actually get information. So sampling methods come first because these affect the types, the groups of people that we are choosing to ask information. But then the way that we get information comes from our next little group of study methods. So once we have our group of 100 people, for example, one way that we can get information from our sample about our population is through a survey. And that's what we see a lot of, okay? So a survey is when we ask a sample a set of questions. It's exactly what you think of when you think of a survey. We can also get information about a group of people through an observational study. Okay. And with an observational study, people are observed. And they're really not affected by the study either. Okay, so I could be doing an observational study with my 3-year-old and how she's interacting with other people and recording data about her, but really she's not affected by what I'm doing. And then I can also get information by using a controlled experiment. Okay. And with a controlled experiment, think about the scientific method. From all of your science classes. There's a control group and there's an experimental group. So unlike the observational study where people really aren't affected by the study, in a controlled experiment, people are affected somehow. But we have our control group and our experimental group, and then compare the results. From those groups. Okay. So like I said earlier on, we'll do a lot more in class talking about what these actually mean, and really like what are we doing with these types of things. But again, kind of our long story short, population is our whole group, sample is part, and then our sampling methods, these help us figure out the sample, the part of the population that we're going to look at. The study methods help us figure out how are we going to get our information.